Am I loud enough? Can you hear me? It's a big sign. Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming today. Welcome to our October meeting. My name is Cindy Gwelly. For those of you who don't know me, I am president of AOI this year, and we're so glad to have you here today. I think we have a perfect Halloween October theme and presentation today, so I'm really excited to hear from Laura today. So I'm glad you're here for this one. The recap of our September meeting, which was with Liz DiGregorio from the Italian American Museum of DC. That recap is in our latest newsletter that is going to be coming out in another month or so. But it also is, the video is currently on our website and on our YouTube channel. So we are going to make that the record of our meeting unless anybody has any objections to that. I'm guessing no. It's great. If you did not get a chance to see it, it's easy to pull up on YouTube. It's easy to find on our website. It's worth a look. It is so worth a look that Juliet Smith has been inspired to go to the Italian American Museum of DC and see what they have put together on the story of Italian Americans here in this city. This museum is relatively small. It's 3 floors, but it's relatively small, and you need to make an appointment to go to it. So if you are at all interested, this might be your opportunity to do so, because Juliet is organizing a group to go to see the museum on October 27th. So you can contact Juliet, you can contact me if you are interested in it, and she's waving the fork over there, and she is going to be bringing with her a gentleman by the name of Camillo Damiano. And if anybody is familiar with him, he came from Italy in 1965 to open up a barber shop in Tenleytown, and has been cutting several generations of people's hair. Does anybody have Bill? Andrea knows him. Okay, yep, you know him. So he is. She's going to be taking him along to see the museum and to give his experiences, I'm sure, as well while he's there, and hopefully convince him to give an oral history for the museum too. So, if anybody is looking to go, this might be a good opportunity to do so. It is free. It is down right by Georgetown University Law School down on 3rd Street. So it is pretty easy to get to as well. So let us know for that.
What time?
I don't think there's a time yet, Juliet, right? I think she's organizing a time. Probably the morning.
I have to connect with Camillo and his caretaker because I'm taking her so she can be with him in case he needs
To have it. So it's
I haven't established the time, but I think it's mid-morning.
maybe mid-morning. So it'll establish. So I'm sure if you are interested, we can connect everybody together and make sure that you have the right time and the right place to be able to get in. So thank you, Juliet, for doing that, because I think you're going to really enjoy it. I learned a lot going there as well, in addition to what Liz had given us as part of her presentation. We have several new members, so I'm going to let Carolyn give us a membership report and then introduce a few of our new members.
Because Lisa, one of our new members, has to leave. Lisa Wilson, she was a neighbor of mine, and she's moved to 1 block away to Church Street. So I encouraged her to join, and so now she has. And welcome. You want to say a few things about this?
Well, hello, everyone. I'm really thrilled to be here. So thank you, Carolyn, for letting me know about the organization. Unfortunately, I do have to run today, but I wanted to come because then I won't be able to come back until the next February meeting. And I thought this was a good way to inaugurate my new life on Church Street. And I really look forward to getting to know the rest of you in the coming year. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you.
And welcome. And we have 2 other new members. I don't believe they're here since the summer. Monica T. Ray and Kathleen Sue McDonald. And Monica was sort of introduced by Philip Pennell, and Linda Ingram introduced Sue McDonald. So,
Great. What?
oh. So, I guess we need to move to.
We will vote them in. I think, Joe, did you want to? He brought some new members that join like on their way.
Oh.
In. So they are brand
Okay.
spanking new members.
Anytime I mention this organization, people are like, yeah, sign me up. So before they even attended a meeting, Sarah joined. Sarah is a member. I don't have an introduction for Sarah, maybe another time. But I do have Susan. Susan is with me. Susan and I are both from Greensboro, North Carolina. She came to Washington from Ann Arbor, University of Michigan. She first lived in Arlington, then Capitol Hill, Crestwood, where I know her. And moved to Chevy Chase, D.C. She retired 2 years ago from the American Institute of Architects, where she was there for 20 years as a senior vice president of membership and chapter services. She can tell you how much fun that was. And her hobbies are gardening, singing, and reading, and she is also a professional good friend.
Oh, nice.
Well, welcome. Any other new members, pop-up members?
I like that. Pop-up members.
And I think,
I like that.
and I think we have a number of visitors. Would anyone like to introduce themselves? No?
No,
Okay.
not yet. Well, then,
Okay.
why don't we vote in our new members?
Yep.
I think we need to officially vote them in. So if we can have a kind of a yay or nay voting in this whole group of new members, I won't make the list of names, but just as a whole group. So by a show of yays to vote them in. Any nays? Okay, good choice. Good call. Okay, well, thank you and welcome officially, everybody.
Thank you and
who's new.
welcome. And anyone who came in late and didn't get a chance to pay, I'm the person.
Carolyn is the one to go to for that too.
And if you want to join, I think that a couple of people asked to join. You can talk to me about that too after the luncheon.
Okay, so anybody interested in joining or want more information to pass along information to join to somebody else, you can also see Carolyn for that. Tonight, AOI is receiving one of the Committee of 100 Lifetime Achievement Awards at a ceremony that they are going to be having tonight. Charles Robertson, who's a member of AOI as well as the Committee of 100, nominated AOI for this award. So I do want to give him a shout out as well. In addition to many other prestigious positions in D.C., he was the deputy director of the American Art Museum and has written a book about that building called Temple of Invention. So he's a big supporter of AOI for us, so I want to be a big supporter of his as well. I do think we have a couple of crossover members with Committee of 100 as well. So it's wonderful to have people that are interested both in the built environment of DC as well as the history of DC as we are here. So look for us if you are going to be attending tonight, and we will post some pictures and details on our social media and on our website after that occurs. I have a call out for some help if anybody has ideas. We have been approached a couple of times now for people who are either downsizing or for other reasons are looking to redistribute DC books, DC themed, DC history books that they have collected over the years. And we are trying to find ways that and places outside of just sending these books to a resale shop, because often these are curated and terrific books, for libraries. So if anybody has connections to libraries or connections to both here in DC or other places that you know of that take collections such as this, or somebody who might want to curate a collection such as that, we know people who have these wonderful books. I hate to see them go into the wind. So if anybody knows of anybody, give me a holler and let me know, because I'm looking for ideas. I have a special relationship with books myself, so I always want to see them going to good homes and to good use. Yes, Marcy.
What is the DC Historical Society?
They don't tend to take very large collections, especially of books they already have. So the DC History Center tends to have copies of most DC books, themed books. So they're kind of not looking for extras. Unless it's such a specialty rare book that they don't have, then they would probably want it.
DCPL, People's Archive.
And the People's Archive, they're also don't tend to take them?
They don't, no.
They don't.
I work there. They don't take out samples anymore, they stop.
They stopped doing that. So I said it's a weirdly odd thing to try to find. Yeah, John?
The Albert Small Museum at GW, I know they've taken a number,
They have Albert Small Museum?
but that's one option.
We'll take a look at them then. Thank you. The Albert Small Museum. Yeah, Judy?
Perhaps the real estate agent best addresses Joseph Denali. He is taking my information about Cleveland Park. He also does tours, and the next tour of his is at Evermay. So I will ask him. if
Ask him,
he
please. Yes.
wants some of these books, because he's collecting things about Washingtoniana stuff that others already either have or don't take.
Or don't take. I would very much love to find a place that would take like an AOI collection somewhere. Yes.
I just thought about it. Who was that? Just hit me up.
That was Judy Hubbard.
Listen to me carefully. Hit me up. My name's Antoinette. Bill knows how to find me. The University of the District of Columbia might make your.
Okay. Okay.
Or possibly, the 33rd Degree Masons on 16th Street. They have the oldest lending library in DC.
Really?
Yeah. And most of theirs is for genealogy and, roots tracing. But perhaps, because they've taken collections before.
Okay, so the UDC, that was Judy Hubbard that was talking before that you were asking. Yes, Lisa.
If you have a relationship with a history teacher or administrator at a nearby public school libraries might welcome some of these.
And it doesn't even have to be in DC if you know of somebody in another place, because I'm going to guess that DC libraries have a lot of DC themed books. So if somebody in, Louisiana wants to start a DC history collection, so people down there can get their hands on something that they wouldn't ordinarily get their hands on. If anybody comes across a name or something or has a lead, let me know, because I would love to be able to direct people towards that. But thank you. I know there's a lot of information in this group. So, and I have a feeling there's a lot of books in this group too. So this will also maybe come in handy if we can find a vehicle to make this happen. So thank you. Crowdsourcing that, I had a feeling was going to be a good idea. And if anybody's speaking of that, any authors that we have, I know we have readers and we have writers in this group. If any authors are interested in the possibility of an AOI author table for the Women's National Democratic Club holiday market, please contact us and let us know if that might be something you'd be interested in participating in. We might have a table with a number of people, so you wouldn't have an individual table, but maybe we could get a group together to be able to represent there and also be able to get your books out for the holiday season. So let me know. John, I'm going to get you a microphone and pass that on to you, because you had some news and comments to make. Unless you want to. Oh, you want to come up? That might be better.
Hi, I'm John Edwards, the Vice President of AOI. I have some sad news to pass on. As many of you may have looked in previous editions of the newsletter, you saw that our featured November presentation was going to be Roger Lewis speaking on his Shaping the City column. Unfortunately, Roger very unexpectedly passed away at the beginning of this month. And so I just wanted to let you all know that obviously he's not going to be speaking. And just to say a few words about him, because he was a very significant person, which is why we invited him here to speak. He wrote the Shaping of the City column in the Washington Post for nearly 40 years, from the early 1980s until 2022. And that was a column that periodically appeared in the Washington Post about all things Washington. And I wanted to read what he said on in a column from 2019 that I wrote down to make sure I got it right. Only by living and working in Washington for more than half a century have I experienced and borne witness to the city's radically transformative evolution from company town to big city. So it's very sad that he's not going to be able to share those insights with us. His work was featured in exhibitions over the years, including a retrospective exhibition of his columns and the cartoons that he would put in each column at the National Building Museum back in 1998. And Roger was also a founding faculty member at the University of Maryland School of Architecture, which he started teaching at in 1968. Until he retired from teaching in 2009. And I was lucky enough to know him when I was in architecture school back in the 1990s, and also worked with him very closely more recently doing city planning, the urban design guidelines for an entire sector of Tyson's Corner a couple of years ago that now contains Capital One Hall, the McLean Metro Station, and Capital One's headquarters. So Roger had a huge impact on the city over the decades, and it's very sad to impart his passing.
We'll also have some more information about Roger on our website. So if anybody wants to take a little bit, to delve a little bit more into his work and his impact, we'll have that information there as well. I'm going to pass this on to Bill to give us an update.
I'm going to come up there.
Yeah.
I'm afraid with two things. I can't pat my head and rub my stomach at the same time. So I don't want this to be another, like a monthly feature, but AOI and its continuing pursuit of sticking its nose into other people's business. Here is a preservation issue that is sort of near and dear to my heart, and AOI kind of got roped into indirectly. So many of you may recognize the Castle building from the Georgetown Reservoir on MacArthur Boulevard. It was part of Montgomery Meggs's Washington aqueduct system. And it is historically designated. Here's the public buildings and parks, something seal from years ago that made it a historic site. Well, all the buildings of the reservoir have been under renovation now since 2017. This has dragged on for so long, I've quipped to people that, in another couple years, it will have taken longer to rehab the buildings than it took Meggs to construct the entire Washington aqueduct, which is true. He did it in 10 years. This is coming up on 8 years of renovations. So as you can see, they stripped the old cladding. None of it's stone. I mean, it's like, John, what did we decide the architectural name for it was? It's like stucco that's then scored to look like stone. I don't know if this has a, here, they score it, but it's really just over brick. So they strip all this off, they repoint the brick, and, it goes on and on and on, and here's the little Washington tunnel gate across the street, which is like a miniature of it, and you can see they've worked on this and all and taken it down. Well, over the years, and I walk by this place twice a day on my daily walks, it's like, well, wait a minute, am I going back in time? Because I thought you finished this, now it's all cocooned again. What's going on? You've made progress, you've made strides. This has been going on since 2017. What the hell's going on? Here's the building after it's been stripped of it, getting ready to be replastered and scored and all. This was from 4 years ago. It's been since plastered, cocooned, and the plaster removed back to this state again. This is just the one across the street. It's like, this is our tax dollars at work or something. So on August 4th, I'm walking down MacArthur Boulevard, and I hear jackhammers pounding away. And sure enough, they are actually dismantling the South Tower all the way down to the ground. So I said, well, something's wrong here. So I contacted someone I know at the Historic Preservation Office. They issued a stop work order. The next day, everything stopped for 2 weeks. Started the ball rolling with the Park Service, with the DC Historic Preservation Board and all, getting the Army Corps of Engineers. What they should have done is when they started anything drastic with a historic property. It should have had a series of 106 hearings where parties are invited. Well, the person at HPO said, oh, Bill Brown, and had AOI's email associated with my name at HPO because of other stuff. So they sucked AOI into being a partner in these discussions and all. And we're like, oh, no, we don't want to take on another thing. But anyhow, we provided some comments. The Army Corps of Engineers has they've gotten their act together, although I think they were hoping just nobody would notice. That's why you've got to be forever vigilant. I got my eyes on you. So the other day when walking by, so now that south tower that I showed demolished a minute ago is back up. They built it back up. And, after they do the north towers, which they're out there jackhammering on today, much to the chagrin of the neighbors, well, then they'll get that done. And then I hope, hopefully before Montgomery Meigs moulders in his grave any longer, we'll get the stucco and the scoring and all on it so it'll return it to its initial view. This is a rendering, this is a painting by Peter Waddell that is on one of the Foxhall Village call boxes along MacArthur Boulevard. So I thought, well, that's a nice view of it, and maybe someday, it'll be back to its original appearance and all. So just another thing of AOI kind of, getting involved in something, even though it wasn't really part of our mission, except preservation, right? Preserving places. So anyhow. Oh, yeah.
A castle is the symbol of the Army Corps of Engineers.
Correct. Yes, that is the view of the Army Corps' logo or whatever. Yes.
The Army Corps issued the contract with the...
Oh, yeah, there have been a couple, and one of the things that held it up, I didn't want, we got to talk. So it's been through a couple of contractors. There was like a year delay when, I don't know, whether there was contracting disputes before it was turned over to Atlantic Restoration, who's been doing it now for a few years. There's another building up at MacArthur and Whitehaven Parkway, a round domed building, that's been cocooned and rehabbed and all. So I don't know, it's just, we'll see what happens. The Army Corps of
responsible for issuing the contract.
Well, Army Corps of Engineers, Baltimore District. Is that it? Okay, thanks.
We have a very literary talk today, or I should say meeting today, because Leo Waring has a few words to say about some books about DC.
Yes, thank you, Cindy. Just to let everybody, advise everybody who likes reading, especially about district, there are 2 current fiction books out that draw upon the history of DC back from 70 to 80 years ago. One of these is Kathy Reich's book, Fire and Bones. She's written a number of books that have become the episodes for the Bones series on TV. And this is, again, she's investigating a fire in Foggy Bottom. And she does some investigation, and somehow this is related to the Foggy Bottom Gang, which just happens to be a book that I wrote 4 years ago. And it must be pretty good because some past president of the AOI named William Brown wrote a nice review in the back of it. And Amazon has marked it down to $10.86, but you can have it today for $10 if you're interested. Well, thank you, Bill. The second book is by Kate Quinn called Briar's Club. Unlike Kathy Reich, she doesn't reference her book in the back, but in the back she does say one character is based on a combination of my Uncle Emmett and one of his associates in his business, and you can guess what that was. The gangster character was a composite of those two. And one of the girls is a composite of one of my dad's old girlfriends and my uncle's old girlfriends. She doesn't reference the book, but you can tell where she pulled it from. I think that's it. So if anybody is interested in the Foggy Bottom Gang, yeah, they can see me. Thank you very much for the time.
And watch Bones on your favorite streaming channel.
Okay, you're up, Nelson.
Okay, it's trivia time. The first question is, name the founding father who helped draft the Constitution and signed the document. It was unanimous, by the way. All the delegates signed the Constitution. Do we have anything that's unanimous today? Can't think of anything. But he is known for this quote. Beer is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy. Raise your hand. We'll do it by raising hands. Pardon?
Benjamin Franklin?
You've got it. Okay, number 2. This is an election year, of course. When President Eisenhower came into office in 1953, his first message to Congress was the fact that the people of the District of Columbia are not represented in Congress. They can't vote for president, but they've served in all the wars. They served under me in the war to defeat Nazi Germany. They pay federal income tax. Have to do something about this. I recommend that the Congress send to the states 2 resolutions to amend the Constitution. Number 1, that residents of the District of Columbia be represented in the House of Representatives as though the district were a state. Number 2, that it be represented in the Electoral College and vote for President of the United States. He made this a priority of his administration. He assigned his Vice President, Richard Nixon, and staff under Nixon to get this through Congress and the states. They were successful in getting the vote for president through. And that was tough. You had to get 2/3 of the vote at the House and the Senate, 3/4 of the states. They just squeaked through in the states because the 11 states of the Confederacy would not approve it. Well, yes, I think we do. Now, the vote for president for the House of Representatives got through the Senate. It failed by 2 votes in the House. Again, the Southern Democrats controlled the House. Down. So in 1964, we voted in the district for the first time for president. Over 250,000 people registered to vote in that election. We hadn't voted for anybody here for 90 years. 90 years. And the turnout was enormous. 92% of the registered voters participated. The polls were to close at 9 o'clock, but lines were still long at that hour, sometimes around the block in some places, at 9 o'clock at night. The commissioners, we were under a free commissioner-appointed government at the time, put out a proclamation that the polls could stay open until what hour? Till everybody would have a chance to vote. How long were the polls open in that first election? To what hour were they ordered to be closed? 9 o'clock was the assigned time.
11:59 p.m.
Well, you're close enough. Yeah, maybe it was 11:59. But the polls, they closed at midnight, but there were still people who were allowed in and actually probably voted the following morning. But that was our first election. I have some ballots from the first election. It was Barry Goldwater and Miller for president, and Lyndon Johnson and Hubert Humphrey for president. The two parties sent representatives to the Board of Elections, and the dice were rolled to see who would go on the ballot first. The Republicans won, so they were on the ballot first. In this ballot this year, there were three. We have a choice of three. I don't know how they were chosen, what order, but first is Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, followed by Trump. Third is Kamala Harris. How this was decided, I don't know. If all parties showed up and rolled the dice, I don't know how they handled it this time. But in 1964, it was the roll of the dice. I have some ballots from that. I passed some out, but I have some extra ballots. If anybody would like to vote. I have another question. Did anybody here vote in the District of Columbia in that election? You did. 3 cheers for this lady. You did too? We have 2. Okay. 4. Okay. We won't ask you how you voted. But so to say, Barry Goldwater, the Republican, did not win, and no Republican has ever done well since. Election night, we'll know the first two jurisdictions that will have voted. They'll probably announce in the District of Columbia for Kamala Harris, and Delaware has 3 electoral votes. So they'll probably be the first 2 announced. Stay tuned. Now, if you want a ballot, here you go. Okay.
I'm going to follow that up with vote, vote, and vote for this election. I'm imagining that I am preaching to the choir in this room. But if you do not have a voting plan, make a voting plan. Have a backup plan. Plan for any problems that might arise. There are flyers on the tables and on the table in the back in case you need information about down ballot information, vote411.org on everything from Board of Education to the judges to finding out the races that we don't tend to hear about on the national news. Take a look for those. There's also information on there for anybody who might need a hotline information if you have trouble at the polls, if you need a provisional ballot, if you have any problems with your polling place. There's information for that as well. So again, I believe I'm preaching to the choir, but go out and preach to other people to go and vote for this election. Because we can't let these people from 1964 down, right? That stood in those lines all of that time to actually make that vote. Well, we have on a themed speaker for our October meeting here. We have our guest speaker is from Oak Hill Cemetery, as you see. They're actually having their gala fundraiser tomorrow night at the Omni Shoreham. If you want to support the Oak Hill Cemetery, after you hear more about it today, I'm sure you're going to be running to do so. And I'm sure Laura will have more information on that if you would like that. But Laura Lavelle, I will give her a proper introduction, née Hackfield, is a native of Washington, D.C. And she happened, the Washington, D.C. area, I should say, and she happened upon Oak Hill Cemetery by chance. And yet her passion for Oak Hill Cemetery and her natural talent for storytelling led her to join its staff as office manager and historian. She has spent years scouring the historical records of the cemetery, and she has uncovered stories that nobody else has either heard or that have been buried for many, many years, and she relishes the opportunities to share them for the very first time in the cemetery's 175-year history in the book that she has been selling. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it, she's going to talk about it, but it is going to be available for sale and signature in the back of the room for $25. So I want to give that plug to walk away with that today. So we're very grateful to have Laura come. I will turn it over to to you. Thank you so much for coming here today.
Well, thank you to Cindy, and thank you to all of the wonderful members of AOI here today. I appreciate you all being here. I'm thrilled at this turnout, and I'm so grateful to have you all here today. Quick introduction on me. It was previously mentioned, my name is Laura Lavelle. I am the office manager at Oak Hill Cemetery and the author of their first history book, which was published in just January of 2024 this year, so very exciting. Let me get a show of hands. Who's been to Oak Hill Cemetery before? All right, I've got a good number here. That's good. Well, for people who haven't been, it's okay. We're going to be around for a long time, so take your time. There's no rush, but feel free to come visit us over on our street. We're 175 years old this year, which not many businesses can proudly say that. So we're honored to be here serving our community and serving DC for many more years to come, hopefully. So what I have here in this first slide, we have the current view of the cemetery here. You can see our gorgeous ellipse and this monument, which you can see also here in this etching from the 1880s. So this event here was the reinterment of John Howard Payne. That's the man here. So John Howard Payne was a songwriter and composer, and he wrote a song that was very popular in the Civil War called Home Sweet Home. It sounds very familiar. Any Wizard of Oz fans? There's no place like home, home sweet home. But Mr. Payne kind of first wrote down that sentiment to music, and it was so popular during the Civil War that Union generals on both sides of the conflict banned it from being sung in camps because it invoked such strong feelings of home that men would be gone by the morning. So, yeah, and can you blame them? So not much has changed, in that time here on the cemetery grounds. We're a bit of a time capsule, which is really fun. So, the early days, how did Oak Hill start? Well, Oak Hill was started as an effect of the rural garden cemetery movement. Now, this started up in the Northeast, started at Mount Auburn Cemetery in Boston. Another great example is Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. It's about 500 acres up there in Brooklyn. Oak Hill is about 22 acres. We started with 10. And the original parcel that was purchased was called Parrott's Woods originally. There was a man there by the name of Richard Parrott who had a rope swing swung across Rock Creek there. So it was a recreational area. People gathered for demonstrations on the 4th of July, commonly used as a lover's lane stroll. So it was a gorgeous hillside descending into Rock Creek. And before it was purchased for the cemetery, it was widely used by the community. But in 1848, William Wilson Corcoran, who that name is very familiar here in DC, founder of the Corcoran Gallery, and he did many philanthropic works in his lifetime around the city. But Mr. Corcoran was inspired by a trip to Boston, by Mount Auburn, and he said, well, Georgetown needs a gorgeous cemetery like this. And I want anyone to be able to be buried there. We're not going to make it, one denomination. We need a great community cemetery. So he purchased the land in 1848 from George Corbin Washington, who was a nephew of George Washington. It was next year in 1849 that Oak Hill Cemetery was established by an act of Congress, as many DC affairs are still tackled today. So here in the photos, we have an early stereo. Both of these are stereo views. This one you can see, we only took a picture of half of it. But the old chapel here used to be covered in ivy, which I think is so romantic. I just love that vista. And then our gatehouse here, has undergone much evolution over the years. This is in its original Gothic form, but I believe it'll be here on our next slide. You can see that that has changed substantially. Over the years, it's been added to and renovated, and it is more in an Italianate style now. With our gorgeous bell tower here that rings during business hours between 9 to 5. It's nice to be able to control, we don't have it going through the night, thank God. And the chapel still looks very similar to what it did back then. Of course, we've removed the ivy. It's not good for the building. But we did recently paint the chapel door here brown to kind of match the original paint color from the 1840s and 50s. So, our founder, William Wilson Corcoran, was a wealthy merchant who was a co-founder of Riggs Bank, which is now PNC. Mr. Corcoran, with all of his money, did a lot of good deeds for the city. This would definitely be one. Another one is the Louise Home. Has anyone heard of the Louise Home? A couple of hands. He started a home after the Civil War for destitute women who were either widowed after the war or, for any kind of circumstances that they weren't able to take care of themselves. But he actually designated one section of the cemetery for Louise Home residents. So in addition to providing for these women in life, he said, we'll take care of you in death as well. So I thought that was very sweet. He pictured here is Corcoran's gorgeous mausoleum. Now you'll see here, this is an old photo. There's actually a little angel here on top with an urn by the side. This embellishment is no longer at the cemetery. So this was a very interesting find when I was researching for my book, and I, interestingly enough, had a woman come into the cemetery office who said, yes, I'm related to the Corcoran family, and I feel like I have this vague memory of this huge statue being carted into our family home, and we didn't know what to do with it, so we just buried it. So you would expect that at the cemetery, not on the family grounds. And then that land was donated, and so this statue is likely lost forever, which is interesting, very interesting. So Corcoran asked Captain George de la Roche to arrange the landscape of the cemetery, to work with the hillside that we're located on to create the terraced levels of the cemetery that exist today. Now, Captain de la Roche here was a very interesting character. He was actually in indentured servitude in his youth and was working on ships in the Caribbean, was captured by pirates at one time, but was able to escape that, safe from harm. And when he was old enough, he purchased his freedom from that indentured servitude and went into the Navy with all of his maritime experience. And from there, he was able to get his engineering training with the Navy engineers. And his his experience with water has been instrumental in keeping the cemetery looking the way it does. He had a unique perspective of, we need to make sure that the drainage system is really working well at the cemetery, because otherwise this hillside is just going to erode over the years. And so we are currently working on updating the gutter system that he laid out, which is still working well. And our current engineer, another Navy engineer, his name's Captain DeVeek, he lauds Captain DeRoche as being a genius in being able to make sure that we're still around. So this is his grave. I've zoomed in here on his inscription here on your left. And then it's quite a tall obelisk here. It's a very nice monument and tucked in with a view overlooking Rock Creek. Of course, trees have now grown in, so it's not as nice, but still a great place. Now, one of my very favorite people buried at Oak Hill is this woman. Her name is Myrtilla Minor. Now, do we show of hands, does anyone know Myrtilla? Great, I love seeing that. So for those who don't know, Myrtilla Minor founded the first school for African American girls here in DC before the Civil War. She was a force to be reckoned with, Miss Myrtilla. She was born in Massachusetts and as a young educator, went down to Mississippi to teach for the for these rich enslavers and their children, and it was the first time that she had experienced seeing that. And when she asked to teach the enslaved children as well, she was maybe not so politely told she should head back north. So she came back north with a mission, and she founded in D.C. the Minor Normal School, which was for the education of African American girls. Now, she faced lots of opposition in the city. Even Frederick Douglass had his doubts about the success of her mission, but there's a lovely letter held in the archives of the University of the District of Columbia that shares Mr. Douglass's initial hesitations, but he was overcome by her drive and the passion that she clearly held. So the school did have to move a few times. They were threatened by guns and fire, and Miss Minor learned how to use a gun to defend herself and her students, and the school was able to continue. Now, Miss Minor had poor health for a lot of her life, and traveled west for cures and also to try to get funding for her school. And she was in a horrible carriage accident that led to her death during forget what year. I hope you'll forgive me. But her school did evolve. It continued on. It was turned into the Wilson Teachers College in 1929 and further evolved to become, forgive me. There were many different names that, minors. Gotcha. Okay. I appreciate that clarification. Yes. So I will amend that. So the Minor Teachers College combined with the Wilson Teachers College. That was my, thank you. To become, yes. Yes, to become DC's Teachers College, which then further evolved into the University of the District of Columbia. Yes, there we go. We got there. I appreciate the help. Thank you. So, Myrtilla is still highly esteemed by UDC as their founder, and for many years have been visiting her grave and paying tribute. And they come yearly. I've had the pleasure of escorting many UDC people to her grave. So, she is a wonderful woman. And I feel like they need a movie about her or something. She's fabulous. Another interesting lady from the early days of DC is Marcia Burns Van Ness. Now, I know Van Ness rings a bell for some of you. There's Van Ness street names, and for us, it's the Van Ness Mausoleum that is kind of the big thing at Oak Hill. The whole section here on the hillside is named after that mausoleum. But this is Marcia. This is Marcia Burns before she was married. Now, Marcia was the daughter of Davy Burns. Does that name ring a bell for anyone? Well, I'll let you know. I know some of you know. But Mr. Burns had a farm on what is now the National Mall, where much of the federal campus now sits. And he held out on selling for a long time. He did not want to sell. He was a tobacco farmer. The farm had been in the family since the 1600s. And he even said no to George Washington, is my understanding. But eventually, he did sell for quite a pretty penny. And at the time of his death, Marcia was the only one of his children that was still alive. So Marcia became the heiress of Washington. She was rolling in dough, if you will. But she very much used her money for good. She opened an asylum for children, so for an orphanage, essentially, in what is now the Chinatown area. It's my understanding is between 9th and 10th Street, and G and H was kind of where that asylum was. And originally, this mausoleum was on the grounds of that asylum, but after she passed and after the asylum closed, that area went up for redevelopment, and we moved the entire mausoleum from Chinatown to Oak Hill in Georgetown. So quite a feat back then for between the 1860s and 1880s. Would have taken a lot of mules, I'm sure, but she is there along with her husband, who was a senator, John Peter Van Ness. Now, getting into the Civil War, this is where I'm just going to really start talking because these two guys are kind of my passion project. And I'll tell you the story. So when I first started working at Oak Hill, my boss encouraged me to learn as much as I could because people come in and they want to hear about everyone. So you need to know as much about everyone as you can. And the way that our old burial system records worked was that, you could click on A on our website and look at all of the A last names. And there's so many. And that was really intimidating for me. So I said, okay, I'm going to start at the back of the alphabet. I'm going to start at Z, W, X, Y, Z, because that's fewer names to start with, and I'll work backwards. And so I found this name, Reinhold Wesselhoft. I was like, okay, very German. Probably should be Reinhold Wesselhoft, right? But I looked up what his headstone said, and it was First Lieutenant Reinhold Wesselhoft, born in Weimar, Germany, died at the Battle of Ball's Bluff in Leesburg. And the stone also mentioned Captain Alois Babo, who also died in that battle. So I was curious. I dove into some research, and interestingly enough, they were part of the 20th Massachusetts Volunteer Regiment. And I was able to find a great book on the history of the regiment, very detailed. And it was able to share a lot about these two. There was a bio about both of them. So Reinhold immigrated to the Boston area as a young boy, went back to Germany for his education as a teenager, but then came back and worked at his parents' water cure establishment in Vermont, homeopathic remedies. But then his father passed, and his mother had no way of caring for the water cure. They had to sell. And it was up to he and his brothers to make sure that his mother and his sisters were taken care of. So Reinhold got a job as a clerk, and spent really all of his money to his mom to take care of things and only kept what he needed. And then the attack on Fort Sumter happened in South Carolina. And part of the reason there was a wave of German immigrants at the time that he came over was there was a revolution in Germany, the Revolution of 1848. And his father was actually a revolutionary in Germany at that time. So he very much... when the attack on Fort Sumter happened, he felt very impassioned and empowered to join the army, the Union Army, and to squash down the people in the South who were against the equal rights that he believed in. So Mr. Wesselhoft, along with Captain Babo here, the two of them arranged and formed their own volunteer regiment comprised of mostly German immigrants from the Boston area. And it took several months at that time, at the beginning of the war, the beginning of the forming of the army. It took a lot of time for these soldiers to be mustered into service. And because of that wait, many people couldn't afford to just sit and wait. They had to survive and eat. And it was Wesselhoft who ensured that everyone in his volunteer company made it to muster by making sure everyone was clothed and fed every day. So he was a really stand-up guy. Everything I read about him just really drew me to a strength of character. And then time came for them to be mustered into the 20th Massachusetts, and they traveled from Boston to D.C., and then marched from D.C. to Poolesville, Maryland, which is quite a hike. But they were stationed there to help protect the Potomac border between Maryland and Virginia, with the Confederates on the other side, around Leesburg, around the Ball's Bluff area. So the Battle of Ball's Bluff was a disaster for the Union, and it started with false intel. The night before the battle, a scout went out to the Virginia Confederate side and thought he saw an abandoned Confederate camp between the trees in the moonlight. He could see the canvas, so he raced back to camp and said, all right, this is our chance to claim some ground. And so the Union Army worked through the night to get people across the river into Virginia. And by the time the sun came up and they returned to that spot, there was no Confederate camp. It was a trick of the moonlight and shadows, and there was nothing there. But at this point, the Confederate troops had become aware that there were Union troops in the area as well, and battle broke out. So the battle lasted a good chunk of the day, and the 20th Massachusetts was an essential piece of the Union defense at Ball's Bluff. Unfortunately for the Union, the Confederacy had them trapped between the Confederate Army and a cliff of Ball's Bluff. So at one point, a Confederate officer said, "Push them into the river or push them to hell," and the battle escalated. This was actually the only battle where a sitting U.S. senator was killed in action, California Senator Edward Baker, a good friend of Lincoln, actually, excuse me. So Reinhold, his senior officer fell in battle, so he assumed his position and led his little company within the regiment, Company C. And towards the end of the battle, both Reinhold and Alois had survived. They retreated down the cliff and came to the Potomac River. They did not take off any gear or anything, and they immediately started swimming across to safety. Unfortunately for them, the Confederate Army was still volleying shots down from the cliff, and one of them was heard to cry out in German before neither of them were seen again. Until 2 weeks later, when Reinhold's body was found beneath Great Falls. Yes, so it took 2 weeks for his body to travel down the river. And when his body was recovered, they found no injury. There was no gunshot or anything. So it is assumed that it was his friend, Captain Alois Babo, who was shot, and Reinhold drowned trying to save his dear friend. I was so moved by this story when I first read it, and I was around Reinhold's age when I read it as well. I'll get really vulnerable. It was at a time when my husband was battling cancer, terminal cancer. So I was really moved by the strength that was so clear and the conviction of character. So I was trying to do as much research on Reinhold as I could, because this guy's my hero now. And I was online as much as I could trying to find stuff, and I found a man by the name of Conrad Wesselhoft. Not a very common last name, right? So I reached out to him. He's an author. And I said, "Do you happen to know who Reinhold is? I pass his grave every week at the cemetery, and I'm curious." And some people are very close. They keep their family history very close. So I wasn't expecting a response, but I was completely overwhelmed and surprised to get a response from Conrad saying, "Oh my goodness, thank you. We had no idea where Uncle Reinhold was for all of these years." And Conrad has a huge portrait, a seated portrait of Reinhold, so it's a photo I don't have, a huge portrait up in his library. He is well revered by his family. And I actually found the widow's pension application that was submitted by Reinhold's mother as he was sending her money, and she was already a widow. They allowed for her to apply for his widow's pension, which was granted, and there were letters of kind of confirming his character in that application, including his former boss when he was a clerk, and his sister, who called him Saint Reinhold. So I was lucky enough to meet Conrad a couple of years ago and show them to the grave, and it was a really beautiful full circle moment, and his story still inspires me today. Now, on the opposite side of that coin, we have these two gentlemen. The one seated here is William O. Williams, and standing is Walter Gipp Peter. Now, these two were Confederate soldiers, and actually, Walter Gipp here was an aide de camp for the Confederates during the Battle of Ball's Bluff. So these three were on the same battlefield, which is interesting. Of course, these two did not emerge. Now, the story of William Williams and Walter Peter is really quite tragic. These were cousins, and Walter was a bit younger, more impressionable, and Mr. Williams had a lot of issues. He had a lot going on. He got rejected by Robert E. Lee's daughter. And frankly, there's no way to know for sure, but I think that's probably what sent him into a bit of a spiral. William Williams convinced his young cousin to disguise themselves and sneak into a Union camp in Tennessee. They were caught very quickly because they looked very out of place and did not know what they were doing. And because this is wartime, they were tried that evening and hung in the morning in Tennessee. Now, they never gave any indication as to what they were doing, why they did what they did, but they were hung the next morning in Tennessee and buried in a shallow grave. And it was both of these two are related to the Peters, which are Tudor Place here in D.C. So it was the Peter family who paid to have these two brought back and reburied at Oak Hill. So they've now been laid to rest. An interesting thing to know, though, if you visit Tudor Place, they have a gorgeous house and museum. And they actually have on display the spurs of William Williams and Walter Peter that they removed from the caskets when they moved them to Oak Hill. Isn't that interesting? Yes, morbid souvenirs. Yes. All right, let's give it a second. I hit next. There we go. All right, so another Civil War figure here. I'm sure people have heard the name Reno before. I know you've heard of Reno, Nevada. We've got Fort Reno here in D.C., and all of those Renos are named after this guy. This is General Jesse Reno. He was a Union general. I think he did very well in his class at West Point. Was very well revered by the Union Army, but unfortunately died at the Battle of South Mountain in Maryland due to a mistaken friendly fire accident. Accidentally taken out by his own man. But he is well revered still, of course, with the naming of Fort Reno in Reno, Nevada. His gorgeous monument here is kind of the landmark for what we call the Reno Hill section of the cemetery. It has a gorgeous draped column here. Now, a broken column in cemetery symbolism means a life cut short. And the drape was a very common Victorian symbol of death. You would cover a mirror, cover buildings with the drape. So gorgeous symbolism there. And interestingly enough, every year we get a visit from Reno High School in Reno, Nevada, and the seniors come and lay a wreath for General Reno. Isn't that sweet? Still fondly remembered. All right, there we go. All right, so another interesting person here. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Battle of Antietam. It's one of the big battles that happened fairly local to us here. It was one of the bloodiest in the Civil War. Now this in the middle is Burnside Bridge. And this is where Henry Walter Kingsbury lost his life. He was leading the 11th Maryland, I believe it was 11th Maryland, and they were crossing the bridge to get to, the Confederates were up on a hillside over here. So it was almost impossible for them to get through this point, and the water, the rocks in the water were so slick, you couldn't get through. So this became a bottleneck of death, frankly. And it's a sad story. Henry Walter Kingsbury was married to the niece of President Zachary Taylor, and he died before his first son was born. But they are both buried together at Oak Hill. They're both named Henry Walter Kingsbury. But a brother-in-law of Mr. Kingsbury was actually the Confederate officer on the top of the hill here, sending his brother-in-law to his death. And in fact, it was that Confederate general did not live very long after this. He was very haunted by the prospect of what he had done. So a very interesting story. Antietam is a great place to visit. I got to go and do some research for the book, and they have it really well laid out over there. So it was during the Civil War that the cemetery had the chance to expand. The Davidson family were the owners of the Evermay Estate, which is still around today. It's at the intersection of 28th and R Street. And we purchased an additional, I believe it was 10 or 12 acres from them, which enabled us to expand eastward in the cemetery. And you can see here another shot of the Van Ness Mausoleum. All of this land would have been part of the Evermay addition. Yes, so gorgeous hillside here. And you can get a hint, you can kind of get a view of the terraces and how things are laid out. So yes, now, we have many connections to President Lincoln. And I'm sure many of you have heard of the book Lincoln in the Bardo. Can I get a show of hands? Yes, George Saunders' book Lincoln in the Bardo won the Booker Mann Prize, I believe in 2017, and depicts Willie Lincoln's time as a ghost at Oak Hill Cemetery. And it's partially based in truth. Willie Lincoln died from typhoid fever in February of 1862. And William Thomas Carroll was a clerk of the Supreme Court at the time and offered Mr. Lincoln a place for Willie to rest in his family mausoleum here temporarily. It was never going to be permanent. Mr. Carroll knew that Lincolns would likely return to Illinois at some point where they were from. So Willie laid here for a couple of years. And Lincoln is noted to have come back several times under the cover of night to visit his son at the Carroll Mausoleum. Some reports go even further and say that Lincoln opened the casket when he would visit and that he would hold his son in immense grief. And it's important to remember that they had a very different relationship with death back then than we do now. It was not as taboo. Family members who had passed used to stay in the family home for a number of days before burial. Very interesting note. And the Carroll Mausoleum is likely the most visited spot at the cemetery because of Lincoln in the Bardo. Some other interesting folks are buried at Oak Hill that were there the night that Lincoln was assassinated. Pictured here at the far right here in this etching is Edwin Stanton. Edwin Stanton was Lincoln's Secretary of War. He was also a great lawyer. You may recognize one of his most famous cases. Has anyone ever heard of a plea for insanity? It was Stanton who won him that verdict. So, thank you, Stanton. But Stanton eventually became Lincoln's Secretary of War. And following Lincoln's assassination, Stanton is the one who led the investigation into the assassination conspiracy. There's a great new TV show on Apple TV Plus called Manhunt, which chronicles kind of the story of the investigation of Lincoln's assassination. And stars Stanton, although without a beard. He had a very big beard in life, and they cut it out for the TV show. It's too bad. But Stanton was there at the time of Lincoln's passing, as well as opposite side of him here, on the left side of the etching, we have a man named Henry Olkey. Now, Olkey was a photographer and portrait painter, and he was actually boarding at the Peterson house with his brother at the time when Lincoln was brought over. So Henry and his brother Julius were running fresh water for the doctors and doing what they could to try to keep Lincoln alive. Of course, did not end up working out. Another interesting thing about Mr. Olkey was that he was a bug collector. He was an amateur entomologist, and he loved beetles. Anything related to beetles, he loved. And at the towards the end of his life, he donated he sold 125,000 beetle specimens to the Carnegie Natural History Museum. And I was lucky enough to have the chance to go to the Carnegie Museum this past April, 2 Aprils ago, sorry. But I got to see some of Olkey's bugs. They still have them. They actually are considered a core part of their holdings, and they will never be on display because they hold too much scientific value. Isn't that interesting? Another person not in the picture here, but another Lincoln associate is Nicolay. John George Nicolay was the first member of the administration hired by Lincoln, and he was his private secretary along with John Hay. And after Lincoln's death, it was John Hay and John Nicolay who put together an enormous 10-volume biography of Abraham Lincoln. So they were essential in biographing America's favorite president. Another interesting figure is Barnes. That's Surgeon General Joseph K. Barnes. You'll excuse me. Surgeon General Barnes oversaw Lincoln's autopsy after he had passed. And interestingly enough, connected to Stanton, he was Mr. Stanton's executor of his estate. So lots of little connections there. And then Kenny, that's not one I have pictured, but a very interesting story. So her name was Mary Cogswell Kenny, and she was there the night that Lincoln died with her daughter and her sister, who was Elizabeth Dixon. Elizabeth Dixon was a very close friend to Mary Todd Lincoln. And after the shooting at Ford's Theater, Mary was overcome with emotion and frankly needed some company in the Peterson house. It was too much going on. And so Robert, her son, sent for her dear friend Elizabeth Dixon, who lived just across from the White House in Lafayette Square. And Elizabeth knew that this was not a task for just one person, so she brought her sister and her sister's daughter. And the three of them sat up with Mary Todd Lincoln until everything was over and Mary returned to the White House. So you don't hear about many women on that day, but they were there. And they were doing what women do best, is supporting each other. Lady power. All right. So back to John Howard Payne. I was getting into this story when we started. So here's that gorgeous etching again. So John Howard Payne was a very famous songwriter, and actually before he was a songwriter, he was an acting prodigy as a child. He was the first American actor to portray Hamlet on stage, and actually acted opposite Eliza Poe, who was the mother of Edgar Allan Poe. So he had quite a career, as is very common nowadays too. Composers and songwriters don't get as much money for their work as they should. And Mr. Payne was frankly rather destitute. But he was appointed as an ambassador to Tunis, now Tunisia, and he did die abroad there in that position. Now, Corcoran, who founded the cemetery, was a huge fan of John Howard Payne. He had seen him in quite a few performances and was a fan of his music. And knowing Home Sweet Home was his most famous work, Corcoran said, "How is it right that this American hero who wrote Home Sweet Home is not buried on his home sweet home soil? This is a travesty." And so Corcoran, on his own dime, paid to have Payne disinterred from Tunisia and brought back to America for reburial in Corcoran's cemetery in a point of pride and place there on our front lawn. So it all worked out. We were able to bring his body from Tunis. It laid in state in New York first, and then came down to D.C. It laid in state at the Corcoran Gallery. And then there was this huge reinterment ceremony at Oak Hill Cemetery. The president was there. We had Supreme Court justices there. And John Philip Sousa and the Marine Band were there and played Home Sweet Home. Isn't that sweet? So Payne was very well known to previous and older generations, not so much today. But we have these lovely ladies paying tribute, and he is in the Songwriters Hall of Fame. So, all right, this is a very interesting story that I'm really glad to share. Am I doing okay on time? Am I going too long? I got 10 minutes. Okay, I'll zoom. Can you guys tell that I love talking? Thank you so much. So So this is a really interesting story. So Ye Washun, the first Korean born in America. Now this is a fascinating story. DC, of course, is an embassy town. And when the Korean embassy sent their first legation to DC, they rented a house on Logan Circle. And they had the legation live and work out of that building. Now, these two lovely people were the parents of Ye Washun, the first Korean born in America. So his dad was a secretary, and his mom was allowed to come since he would be on such a long diplomatic mission. And because Korea was a very isolated country before becoming diplomatic, it was recorded and well known that this was the first Korean born in America. So very special. The newspapers in DC wrote all about it, and how she was embracing more American ways of parenting maybe than she was, culturally used to from Korea. Unfortunately, little Ye Washun passed away about 5 months old. He had complications from eczema. And the landlords of the house the legation rented offered a space in their family site for this little boy, for little Ye Washun. His parents did end up going back to Korea, but he stayed. And we get visits from the Korean embassy and actually the old Korean legation museum, which is housed where the legation originally was housed on Logan Circle. A fabulous museum. I definitely recommend you check it out. Another interesting figure, we have one of the co-founders of Czechoslovakia, buried at Oak Hill Cemetery. This is Stephen Osuski. Now, he was actually exiled from Czechoslovakia when there was lots of regime changes happening. He was doing his best to make sure Czechoslovakia could stand on its own, and he was eventually exiled. So he relocated to America. He was based out of Herndon, Virginia, and when he passed, he decided Oak Hill would be the best final resting place, or we like to say your final forwarding address. Now, bringing it back a little more locally here, I know you guys know the Washington Post. I know you know Katharine Graham and her husband Philip, and then Ben Bradley, of course. Now, all of these are right by the front entrance of the cemetery. The Graham's lot is right next to the chapel, and they have the family headstone there and little footstones that actually have the names. So the bottom one here is Philip. He's in an urn and is really kind of right there with the stone. And then Katharine Graham is actually in a casket, and this stone is placed by her feet. So we call that a footstone. Okay? And then the story of the Bradley Mausoleum is interesting. Mr. Bradley and Sally Quinn originally came in and purchased a very nondescript, kind of not very impressive site in a back corner of the cemetery, actually in the Louise home section. But after he passed, Mrs. Quinn came back and said, "What else have you got?" So Ben was upgraded with this lovely mausoleum. This was actually a point of contention with the community for a bit. We were sued by the Cultural Landscape Foundation, who argued that we did not have the correct permits for building a mausoleum, and that we were destroying the landscape history of Oak Hill, which of course is always changing as natural places are. Thankfully, we were able to win that lawsuit. We don't need permits for buildings that people aren't living in. So that worked out well. And the Bradley Mausoleum, it welcomes you every time you walk into the cemetery. It's right there at the front.
Laura, we have about five minutes. Do you want
We want to do questions, right? Yeah, let's open up to questions. We recently buried Madeline Albright, and then we do some cleaning around the cemetery as well. So we have some projects going on. If you're interested in buying a site, we do have plenty of sites. We're creating real estate, and we're expanding our work in many different areas. So I would be happy to open the floor for questions. I'm sorry I was talking so long.
No, it's perfect. I'm just guessing that there might be some questions. Do we have anybody who would like to start out with questions? Then,
So this question is on behalf of a longtime AOI member, Stuart Loughborough.
Okay.
You may know from Loughborough Road, Loughborough Farm, and all.
He's been emailing me this week.
Oh, he has?
Yeah.
You might be ahead of me. Anyhow, Stuart's been emailing us and saying he wished he could be here. I said, well, you can watch the program on YouTube afterwards or on our website. But he left me sort of this obscure question about one of the Loughboroughs that's buried there, and he would probably be upset to know that his sister or somebody had done something in 1862. I mean, that's how vague it was. Are you
Yeah.
aware of any connection about a Loughborough and maybe a Confederate sympathizer or something from back then?
So I don't know the full story, but I did also get an email from Stuart Loughborough this week, and it did reference this 1862 act. And what he had written in my email was that it was his understanding that this relative of his, Margaret Loughborough, had actually freed slaves that she had power over. In 1862, she had freed them, and apparently the rest of her family held it against her forever. They were not very happy about that. I can only imagine why. But of course, justice was done, and I give major props to Miss Margaret Loughborough for breaking that cycle. Absolutely, yes.
any other questions?
Got some questions over here.
We're going to get you the mic's coming this way.
We're gonna get you the microphone, Beth.
Is there any connection between a guy named Tommy the Cork and this Corcoran that you're speaking about?
Not that I'm aware of. No, Cork and Corcoran, I think those would be different. Yeah.
You know, I think I can. Thank you. Just at what point did the cemetery change from Mr. Corcoran Cemetery to kind of a more public community cemetery?
That's a wonderful question. So Mr. Corcoran was involved in the cemetery up until his death. But I do believe it was his intention in founding it that it was open to the Georgetown community. So I would say, for people to not think of it as Corcoran Cemetery would probably be after he died, because he was associated with it his whole life. Absolutely. Absolutely. I got a question here.
Yes. The German soldiers
Yes.
that were kept together before they were mustered, I guess, included in the Union Army. How did that soldier manage to scrape together whatever it took to keep them together?
There were no resources that went into that when I read the story. It just said that he was mostly responsible for it. So I don't know if that was going to restaurants and asking for donations for food, or going to stores and asking for donations for clothes and stuff. But I would imagine it would be a bit of networking and a bit of just being charming and asking for help. I think people are happy to help if they're asked. So.
Terry, I see your hand back up. Just yell real loudly. Go ahead.
Microphone right behind you, Terry.
I'm Terry. I'm the historian at Dockor Bacon House.
Wonderful.
Which is where the Carrolls lived.
Absolutely.
And so I've been very interested in that vault, the mausoleum that they have. I did find that Abraham Lincoln's close friend in Springfield visited him in 1862 after the death of Willie Lincoln, and consoled Abraham and his wife. And Mary Todd Lincoln offered his carriage to take him to Oak Hill to view the body of Willie Lincoln. So the deacon of the cemetery, or the sexton, whatever it was, opened the mausoleum for him, and he viewed the body, which was covered with a glass dome. And it was very fresh looking, and the mausoleum was was covered with flowers that Mrs. Lincoln sent twice a week to keep it sweet smelling. And it's one of the few actual eyewitnesses account of somebody going to Willie Lincoln, who was embalmed, of course, to view the body.
That is fascinating, and I would love to connect with you and get that resource to share that story further. That's beautiful.
Actually, I sent it to your office, so it's there somewhere.
All right, I'm gonna start digging when I get back. Thank you.
We'll make sure to connect you.
Yes, thank you.
Frank, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a couple of quick questions. First of all, if you were looking for people from a certain neighborhood, like Foggy Bottom, to see if they were buried in the cemetery, do you have that information online, or do you have to have the name of the person to try to find them?
You are going to need the name of a person. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't track neighborhood information when people are getting buried. So you would have to know the name. Yeah.
And did the cemetery only admit white people, and when did it become desegregated?
That's a wonderful question. For a long time, the cemetery was white only, even though Corcoran expressed interest to be open to everyone. He really was not. I don't believe that we have a solid year that we decided to become fully open, but we are certainly now and have been through recent history. I see Sherry.
Hi.
Hi, Sherry.
I'm Sherry Sewell. I'm a member of the board here. My question is, my understanding is that a past president of AOI, John Bon Blake, is interred at Oak Hill. And I'm wondering if that's something you can help me further look into.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't know how many of you were here for Sherry's wonderful talk a few months ago about her ancestor buried at Oak Hill. But it was fascinating, and it turns out that relative had a son of mixed race who ended up starting the Black AOI. So fascinating story, truly fascinating. And Sherry, I would love to work with you further on getting some more information on that. You've got it.
I wanted to add one last thing about the election of 1964. I mentioned that, of course, Barry Goldwater got defeated 9-1. But he was one of the major advocates of President Eisenhower's proposals to amend the Constitution to be represented in the House and vote for president. He didn't hold that against the District of Columbia for voting against him in 1964. He became a major advocate for our voting rights.
I just want to say thank you one more time for you all for your time and coming out. If you have any questions for me or interested in buying a book, I will be stationed in the back for you.
I do want to give Laura a certificate. If I could have your attention for just one more second. Oh, she's good. Well, we're keeping her around. Okay, I just want to give Laura a certificate of appreciation as well as a coin, an AOI coin, to say thank you so much. We do have some AOI members, I believe, that have been buried at Oak Hill Cemetery. So we will also be connecting with Laura to make sure those are identified as well. So thank you very much, and we'll hope to see you in November. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I appreciate it. Let me shake your hand here. We'll do a hug too.
Yeah, we'll do a hug. Yeah, thank you.
Much.
That was so fun.
Oh my gosh, I had too much. I put too much on the PowerPoint.